Welcome back, everyone. So remember the gun control versus anti-gun control video that I made? Mr. C.R. Williams made a response video, and so I was going to touch up on that. So here we go. I'm going to try and situate. I'm going to be playing the video over here. Well, for me, it's to my right. It might be mirror image in post, but we'll see. So here we go.
That you'd see within the United States if a significant portion of the population decided, okay, we're done playing nice. It's not going to be a conventional battlefield. It's going to probably fall in.
All right, so I'm going to pause it there. Before I continue on, let me just say that his video was an hour long, so I did have to take segments out and try and look at like kind of the key points and things that really stuck out in my mind. And actually there's a lot of stuff that I agree on, and this is one of them, is that yes, if we did have a civil war, we would probably be looking at military factions siding with the civilians rather than the government. So that is a good point. Smokey, move. I have a cat laying on my stuff. So let's continue with the video.
For the insurgency, counterinsurgency operations, Constitution, it still falls under what would be U.S. law. So I haven't seen anybody on the gun control side put forth a serious effort to change that. And me, I'm still formation operations, and that's actually been around since the time of our founders. If you were to look at, say, the homicide rates between the U.S. and the U.K. in the year 2000, it's very easy to get the misperception that gun control is the reason why the UK has a much lower homicide rate. But I do want to show you a chart right here real quick. I'll say right in blue, that's the US homicide rate, and the homicide rate in red is the UK homicide rate. And you can see from the US homicide rate, it's significantly higher than the UK homicide rate. And there's a lot more fluctuation in there.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. One thing that and again, I agree on this too, is that, and I mentioned this, is that you get a lot of biased statistics and a lot of really taking statistics and things out of context to support the left's narrative and agenda. That does happen quite a lot. And actually that doesn't just happen in the left, that happens in any category, wherever you fall on the political spectrum of things. And it is really kind of unfair to compare the United States to countries over in the UK, because the truth of the matter is a country in the UK is about the size of a state here in the United States. So that is a fair point to make. So let's continue on.
UK homicide rate, it's kind of been always low from 1900 to 2000. And when you consider the fact that the UK didn't get a lot of their major gun control laws pushed to the late 1980s and 1990s, you really start to see now that it doesn't look like gun control
at least
has
you
done
admit
anything
that
to
the
slow
UK
the
homicide rate has been lower than the United States.
So that's a portion of the information the gun controllers always tend to leave out. And when you just hear the homicide rate for the US and the UK in the year 2000, and that's the only information you have to work with, yes, people can get the misconception that maybe gun control has done something for the UK when really it hasn't. The UK, all of these countries, the US, dwarfs in population.
All right, I'm going to pause it there. Again, I can't stress enough the difference between the UK and the United States. We are two very, very different countries, and I brought that up in the video too. I think I did. Did I? Maybe I didn't. But we are very, very different. Well, I did. I said that we have a different kind of cultural aspect to us than the UK does. So it really is kind of unfair, and I can see that it's unfair to point out statistics over in the UK versus over here in the United States. I think the argument on that, and in looking in that from the left side, is that we're seeing something that they've done that's worked, and we're wondering why it is we can't apply it here and why it wouldn't work here. But again, it still goes into cutting into people's rights, whereas people have the right to bear arms here. They don't have that over in the UK. So I guess in a sense, that's one up that America has on the UK, on a lot of countries in the UK, is that we do have that right, whereas they don't. So let's continue on.
Population. Also, it's worth pointing out that you're comparing the U.S. to a country like the UK, it's really an apples to orange comparison. And I pointed this out in previous videos that the UK is a smaller country. It's an island state. The culture is more homogenous, whereas in the U.S., it's no secret that we have several different cultures in several different locations. More is because a lot of people on the gun control side of things, when they present their numbers, a lot of the times they will say, well, here's this correlation. Well, here's this correlation here, and they'll present it as if firearm
Did you see that chart?
Rights are the cause.
I think it's funny that all those countries with really high crime rates are shit countries. I don't mean to offend anyone there, but well, I don't know, maybe I just don't care if I offend anyone on that, but a lot of the countries with higher crime rates are really shitty countries. They're third world countries. They have almost no economic growth. Their governments are highly corrupt, and so I find that to be kind of interesting.
Which, in fact, is not the case at all. Now, I noticed that a lot of the times they will focus
there was another point that I was going to make. I
rates.
My cat's distracting me. She likes dangly
You tend to mention crimes with the U.S. and other countries. There are a lot of violent crimes that the U.S. does not experience at quite the rate that a lot of these other countries do. Gunfights and stuff like that, and yet none of these situations have actually materialized. In fact, when concealed carry when shall issue concealed permits started becoming a thing from state to state to state to state, you notice that after they got passed, generally speaking, homicide rates, violent crime rates tended to drop. There's a lot of data to take.
And I find this chart interesting because it kind of shows the decline in crime rates. And then there's that chart as well. And that is actually a fact, is that in the United States, our crime rates have actually been going down over the years, not going up. That is true. And with this particular map, I'm not going to say which red dot it is, but one of those red dots is where I live. I live in an area that permits conceal and carry. I don't have a problem with it, by the way. It hasn't really affected anything.
historical, current. There are a lot of factors that have to be analyzed and assessed. And when you get into a lot of the research, there are a lot of factors that get left out either intentionally or unintentionally. There are a lot of factors that you can't account for. And really going by case is virtually impossible because there's a whole...
I'm going to pause it there. And yeah, he is right. And I mentioned that in my video too, is that really trying to get a hold of good statistics and a good study to really show, like, is it a fact that gun control is better, or is it a fact that no gun control is better? That's a really hard statistic to come by to make it fact. This is all very opinion-based, and this is one of the reasons why I wanted to do this, is because when it comes to gun control and gun rights, there are many shades of gray where people fall and how they feel about gun ownership, gun rights, and gun control. Many shades of gray. It's not, you do have your extremes on both ends. You do have people, I've seen people that want to have the right to have a bazooka. I don't know if people should have the right to be able to own a rocket launcher. And then you have, on the other side, where people want to completely abolish any rights to any firearms whatsoever and just take away that right all in of itself. So let's continue on.
Of data that you have to get into with that.
Indeed.
So yeah, there's a lot of data to analyze. I mean, even John Lott, who did go into the subject very much so in depth. In fact, I think
I don't know who John
out of
Lott
all the
is.
research I've seen, John Lott is
I'll have to look
probably
into him.
the one that has the most data put into the research and has gone over as many factors as they possibly could. So, but yeah, even then, the only conclusion he came to on that one was that shall issue concealed carry was actually a good thing in preventing crimes. That number is accurate on firearm-related deaths, but to sit there and say that that's gun violence is a bit misleading and deceptive. Given
And I
that,
agree with
I do
that.
want to show you a chart that kind of breaks this down, so to put more clarity on the situation.
Oh, wow. Look at that suicide rate. Man.
All right, so we can see right now why it's a little deceptive to call it gun violence. When you get the idea of gun violence,
Yeah, I would definitely
most
say
people think
suicide is not gun violence.
somebody going out and murdering a bunch of other people. From those 4 basic rules, if you follow at least 3 of them, you're going to mitigate a lot of your accidental deaths.
And I really like this. I think gun owners should follow this.
First off, you don't point a firearm at anything that
And that's a crazy
you're not
gun
willing
to
to
me.
see destroyed.
That
or
is a
damaged,
really crazy
or killed,
gun.
or injured.
To me.
The second
To me,
is
it's
you
crazy.
do not put your finger in the trigger well until you are ready to fire. The third is you never assume a firearm is unloaded. You visually verify. And the fourth, and this really applies to if you're shooting to protect yourself hunting or shooting at a target range, and that's be aware of your backstop and what's beyond it. But if people follow those 4 basic rules, the accidental firearm deaths will drop even more significantly.
I'm going to pause it there and say that, first of all, I think that the gun safety thing that he's going over is really important, and that's something that should be addressed. And I really wish that, I hope that a lot of people follow that. There was something else I was going to say. I'm just going to go ahead and continue. And on pause.
You notice that, yes, firearm suicide is a little over the majority of all suicides. However, there's a huge portion of those suicides that are done by other means. And if you also take into account countries like
suicide rates,
Japan and South Korea have low firearm ownership rates, they have very stringent gun controls, and yet their suicide rates dwarf ours, it's not too far-fetched to understand that people will find...
And I'm going to pause it there. I totally agree with that. It is true that people who have suicidal tendencies, even if they don't have access to a gun, they will try and find other ways to commit suicide. And personally, I have had suicidal thoughts. I have not had too many suicidal tendencies. I have gone out and sought help. I do have psychiatrists and psychologists that I have seen throughout my life. I was diagnosed with bipolar type 2 when I was, it was 1992. I was very young. But the thing with me on owning a gun, and I would never own a gun, is because for me it was too easy. With everything else like knives and poisons and hanging yourself and jumping off a bridge, I always consider the aftermath. And this is something that people who have suicidal thoughts will do, is they'll think about that type of thing, something that isn't going to affect the people around them, to have to sort of, I guess, clean up the mess. And yeah, so that's something that does go through people's minds that do contemplate suicide. Actually, I think there's actually a difference between males and females in the way they perceive that, which is why females go more towards, I think, like overdosing on medications, whereas males will take a gun to the head or hang themselves. And it is different depending on males and females. I don't know if you caught the gist of this, but psychology is something that I'm vastly interested in. I do not have a degree in it. I am not formally taught in it. It's something that I do have a high interest in, and I have done a lot of research into psychology and psychology in general that extends into criminal psychology. And that fascination with psychology comes from my own psychological state. Yes, you are absolutely right. Guns are not solely responsible for suicide. That is something that takes place up here. So, that being said, yeah, guns are not responsible for suicide, and people who are suicidal will try and find means to commit suicide with or without them. I'm just saying that for me, it was scary because without the gun, I came nowhere that close. And when I owned the gun, I came just that close. Too close for comfort for my family. It was actually my brother who took the gun away from me because it scared him. And he doesn't have a problem with guns. He doesn't have that issue. He's gone now. He didn't... That's a different story. He actually fired it. Apparently it still worked, even though it was kind of an antique. But for me, it was just knowing that it was just that easy, that it was so close, that it was be so quick and painless, and it was a different kind of thing than hanging yourself or taking too much medication, something that would be slow and long and drawn out and more painful. It just seemed too quick of an option. So that was my personal take on it. Continuing.
Other ways to commit suicide if they are intent on committing suicide. That, yes, firearm suicide is a little over the majority of all suicides. However, there's a huge portion of those suicides that are done by other means. And if you also take into account countries like Japan and South Korea have low firearm ownership rates, they have very stringent gun controls, and yet their suicide rates dwarf ours, it's not too far-fetched to understand that people will find other ways to commit suicide if they are intent on committing suicide. Moreover, when Canada, quite a few years back, they passed some more restrictive gun controls, mainly, I think, pertaining to long guns. And what they found out was a lowered youth suicide by shotgun
but the suicide rate probably
and the gun controllers touted that. What they failed to mention was that the overall suicide rate did not change. Moving on to homicides. Now, with homicides, I showed you the chart to where they're concentrated at. There are a lot of those places where they already have strict gun control laws. I mean, and even you look at places like Mexico or even worldwide, there are a lot of countries out there with strict gun control laws and yet have a homicide rate that dwarfs ours.
Nations.
So, given that, is there any reason to believe that gun control will really do much of anything to reduce homicides? I mean, I've showed you the chart of the UK homicide rate was virtually unchanged by gun control. When it comes to places like DC, and I showed you the chart on that one when they lifted the outright handgun ban. Now, they still have strict gun control laws in DC, but their homicide rates did not jump up when that ban was lifted. Gun control really doesn't do anything to reduce homicides. Gun uses, and you remember the previous chart would had 1% of the firearm-related deaths were due to legal intervention, right? And here you see on this chart they've taken that number and they have used solely that number to say that, well, self-defense with a firearm is rare. And that's very deceptive in my book, and I'm going to show you why here with these charts coming up.
Percentage of okay, flashed there.
Up to 92% of the time where the defender brandished a firearm and the perpetrator fled. The other percent, second highest percent on this chart, was the firearm was fired, but the perpetrator was not hit. The third percent you see on this chart was the perpetrator was hit but wounded, and that don't even show the percentage of the time when the perpetrator was hit and killed because it's such a negligible percent. It's such a negligible number that it's not even worth showing. Perpetrator, your goal is not to be a police officer yourself. You're not out there to go run down suspects or make arrests or anything like that. You have the firearm to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your property. And that's it. Okay, so I say this in all sincerity. I'm glad that you did come forward with this. I'm glad that you yourself can admit that maybe firearm ownership isn't the best option for you.
For a second. And I'm glad that he says that. Honestly, in my opinion, I'm going to do a recap at the end, because there's other things that he covers. I will leave the link to this video. It was quite long. It was an hour, and I did have to kind of separate this to try and make the video a little bit shorter. But if you're willing to say that there are some people that don't need to own firearms, that's really where I kind of stop at gun control. Is when I say gun control, I'm talking about the people out there that probably shouldn't be owning guns. And that falls under the line of people who are mentally unstable, people with mood disorders, and such like that. They probably shouldn't be owning guns. And if you agree to that, then I don't have a problem with the rest of it, really. Like I said, I don't know that people should be able to own a rocket launcher or a bazooka. But okay, we're going to continue because I'm going to recap.
And it does take some courage to admit something like that. It really does, and that's another thing I mean in all sincerity. And furthermore,
and I'm glad you agree that not everybody should own a weapon.
Will admit openly that firearm ownership is not for everybody. It's not going to be everybody's thing. But on the issue with suicide, it probably would be a good idea to try to seek some help to try to get past that point. Not so you can own a firearm, but more for your...
I'm going to pause it there. Absolutely. Believe me, I've been living with depression for a very, very, very long time. I have come to the point of where I've been able to manage it quite well. Like I said, I've been seeing psychiatrists and psychologists for a very long time. I'm at the point where I just take medications. I don't see a psychologist anymore. It got to the point where basically everything that he would tell me about issues in psychology was stuff that I had already come to know. So that's why I don't see the psychologist anymore. I still see a psychiatrist for medication purposes. And actually I have a video coming out about that. There's a new medication out on the market that is not an SSRI, which is really good. But I'll get into that in another video. Continue.
Your own benefit. Weapon, I'm presuming you're talking about black rifles. And I appreciate you, by the way, not using that term, because that's a very misleading, deceptive buzzword, more like term that the gun controller.
And I'm going to pause it there for say, honestly, if I'm going to be honest, you could show me an AK-47 and a black rifle, just a multitude of guns that even look like each other. I wouldn't be able to tell you which one was which. I'm not, I'm clearly not a huge gun advocate, and they're not something I'm deeply fascinated by. So I wouldn't know the difference. I don't call them assault rifles. I don't call them assault anything because I don't really think that's their technical name. And that's not a point that I even knew existed. I didn't even know that was a thing. I just don't call them that. I usually just call them crazy guns because they look really dangerous to me. And that's just my own personal reflection looking at guns. I personally am uncomfortable around guns. That's just my personal thing. I don't have anything against people having guns. It's just me personally, on a personal level, my personal opinion, my personal feelings. And I'm just trying to illustrate how just anecdotal and personal it is that I don't feel comfortable with guns. I don't like handling them. I don't like really being around them. But I don't have anything against people who are comfortable being around them. I don't have anything against people owning them. I'm fine with it. Continue.
Jeez.
And I will keep that in mind for the
a certain
future.
type of rifle, namely the black rifles. Now, even Josh Sugarman from the VPC has said that, yes, the term assault weapon is used to mislead people. And I appreciate you not using the term because it shows that you're actually trying to look at both sides of the argument. I'm going to try to keep this as short, as simple as I can on this, merely because I could do a whole series of video on black
I bet you could.
They're really more common than you think. There's a misperception that people who own them are paranoid and such, but that's really not the case at all. It's a very big misconception. Most of my friends who own firearms own at least one, if not more, black rifles. I own quite a few black rifles myself.
Wait till you see this.
The AR-15 in and of itself is
that looks
the most
crazy
popular
to me.
rifle platform
That is a crazy
in the United
gun.
States. It's America's rifle for very good
This
reason.
is my opinion.
It's very customizable. This right here is a Colt LE6920. It's the law enforcement model. It's the closest thing I could get to what I was issued when I was in the United States Army without having to fill out a bunch of
It looks like an army
NFA
gun,
Title II
honestly.
paperwork paperwork or without breaking some 1986 legislation that prohibits.
Do you agree that the paperwork is appropriate? I think the paperwork is appropriate.
Public use, period. Very modular rifle. There's a lot of utility to the rifle. You can use it to hunt. You can use it for personal protection. You can use it for plinking. You can use it for 3-gun competitions. People collect.
Actually, a gun competition sounds like it could be a fun thing.
How to shoot it.
I'm not against that.
This is an excellent rifle for personal protection.
I don't doubt that.
This one handles a lot of situations. I mean, about the only thing that is impractical about this rifle is using it for concealed carry or everyday carry.
Where would you put it?
Home defense, it's hard to top the rifle. In most DGUs, obviously, there's not a shot being fired. Now, imagine a DGU when someone chose a Smith & Wesson 38 Special on a J-frame versus a rifle like this. What do you think?
If I was a home intruder carrying a Smith & Wesson and I entered into somebody's home and you had that crazy thing, I'd be like, oops, sorry, wrong house. I would run. I'd be like, no, fuck this, I'm out. So, yeah, that is true. It would be a very effective deterrent, probably without even firing it. At least from my perspective. If I saw that, I would tuck tail and run. I'd be like, can't compete, bye.
Is going to persuade the home invader or home invaders from fleeing quicker. That Smith & Wesson 38 on a J-frame or a rifle like this.
Like I said,
guys,
I would tuck tail
no one in
and
the gun
run.
community believes that there's actually going to be a zombie apocalypse when they're talking about their zombie apocalypse gun.
Does anybody actually believe there's going to be a zombie? Anybody that believes that there's actually going to be a zombie apocalypse is really, really dumb. Zombies don't exist. They're not going to exist. Reanimated corpses is just something that's not possible in our reality.
Just it. So, and in that case, the AR-15 is a superior platform. One other thing I did want to cover on this one too, because I've heard it being brought up, and that is the zombie apocalypse.
I think I messed up on the editing around here.
Guys,
oops.
No one in the gun community believes that there's actually going to be a zombie apocalypse when they're talking about their zombie apocalypse gun.
Yeah, I messed up, but zombie apocalypse,
that's just a hobby
really?
gun. You know, it's just harmless fun at the range. On this one, man, I mean, I understand.
I have no problem with hobby guns either. If you have that gun as a hobby gun and having fun at the range, that actually sounds like a good time.
Now, here's a chart
I would have no problem owning a gun for that purpose alone.
This could be completely way off base here, but I'm going to show the chart anyway.
Please don't ever flip your lid, though. I hope you never flip your lid.
Again, I have no idea on the accuracy of these numbers. I know I don't have suicidal thoughts.
Well, and the thing about suicidal thoughts and actually doing it is...
I'm not a mind reader. I can't tell. I do know they happen, obviously. The vast majority of our fire...
Pause it there. The thing with suicidal thoughts is a lot of people do have suicidal thoughts, even people that don't have depression. The thing is that our society... really it suppresses the notion of expressing negative emotions. Our society is not really keen on expressing what is perceived as negative emotions, and that even includes depression. So even though people have suicidal thoughts, they may not always express them. A lot of the times they're not even serious about it. It's just a fleeting notion. It really takes an open dialogue and being really understanding, accepting, and caring to have that kind of conversation where they will open up with you in that kind of sense. But a lot of people, surprisingly, depression or no depression, do have a suicidal thought at least once in their life.
From related deaths or suicides, and and they're only a slight majority of the suicides, a very slight majority of our nation's suicides. So people do commit suicide. Yes. I would argue that you're not really helping out the problem. And in fact, I think we need to look to other ways. I noticed too many days where day at the range, I didn't come away feeling pretty great. Because there are a lot of
and there's something to be said about that, actually.
That refuse to even acknowledge that you're taking away people's freedom with gun control. So again, I appreciate you mentioning that.
You're welcome. He's talking about how I brought up that when people on the left talk about gun control, I brought up the fact that you are taking away a right from people. And as a liberal, that's hard for me to do. I don't like the concept of taking away rights from people. And essentially, when we do talk about gun control, you are talking about taking rights away from people. So you have to be really careful about this.
Stunt on some gangbangers, as opposed to unarmed, law-abiding citizens. Now, on the concealed carry side, yes, it varies state to state. Most states are shall issue, but you get some places.
Pause it here and say that this is an issue, the topic that I did bring up, and he covered it a few times because I think I kind of separated it out a little bit. But yeah, it is good that civilians here in the United States are capable of carrying weapons because, as I said, it's not so much about... At the topic that I was talking about, it's not so much about internal threats with other American citizens. I mean, yeah, you can use it for that, like, people trying to rob you, murder you, rape you, blah, 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 blah. But it's also, we're more of a threat to outside influences, like Syrian refugees trying to come over here. We pose more of a threat to terrorists coming over here because we are allowed to have weapons as citizens. And you don't know who has one, especially with the right to conceal and carry, which, like I said, I live in an area that does have that. You can conceal your firearm in the area that I live in. So you don't even know who has it. You don't know who has one. Moving on.
Like New Jersey or California, that's a may issue. And even in California, the may issue varies from shall issue in some counties just about to never issue in other counties such as LA and San Francisco. However, law-abiding citizens carrying to protect themselves,
and I agree with
would
this.
Also kind of put a little bit of a wrench in those who want to enforce.
And I'm glad you're not afraid to bring that subject up.
As is, as well. Or at least the ones at home with firearms. For the most part of this debate, a lot of them haven't really had the gun controllers going after them.
I'm going to pause it there for a second. Now, on this topic, so the hunters, the people who are using firearms to go hunting, maybe they're not being directly attacked by people on the left, but there are people on the left that want to completely abolish gun rights altogether, just get rid of guns altogether. Now, they may not be outright attacking hunters, but you have to admit, or would you be willing to admit, that some of these gun control legislations that some of the people on the left want to pass, they may not be directly attacking hunters, but inadvertently it would affect them, is what I was getting at. Is that if we did abolish guns altogether, they would no longer be able to hunt with guns. And that does affect them.
Controllers have primarily been going after firearms that were intended for self-defense. Gun rights side of things have a similar issue with this. The fact of the matter is that every time we pass one of these neutral restrictions, there's always one more that comes up that's just neutral and reasonable and common sense.
I call myself neutral because, I'm going to pause it there. I say that I'm neutral, and also I'll cover over why I'm neutral actually in the recap.
It's almost like the gun control side of this seems to never be satisfied about the terror watch list and the no-fly list, which, by the way, the terror watch list is a much broader list. I was talking about something else. The no-fly list, this is something. People on the no-fly list cannot fly. Now, I have an issue with that, and actually not to appeal to authority, but the ACLU has an issue with both lists, period. And I'm not a fan of either list, period, as well, because both of them deprive.
And this sounds just plain unconstitutional. This sounds like an infringement on people's civil liberties and civil rights.
More secretive than the watch list, so you can't even tell the criteria on how you get on the no-fly list. We do have quite a bit of gun control laws in this country as is. Is that we have gone maybe a little too far on some of the gun control laws, and really a lot of the further restrictions that are being proposed are going to do more.
And I'll cover over some of that in my recap.
Not be deprived of firearm ownership from being deprived of owning firearmship. There's the Lautenberg Amendment, which under the Lautenberg Amendment, anybody convicted of misdemeanor domestic violence is a prohibited person. I think that went a little too far, because anything, that you would see as being somebody who's going to actually injure or kill their spouse seriously, or, a serious wife beater or a serious stalker, a lot of those things are already felonies as is. I know in Texas, you punch somebody in the face on the street, or even a friend, and, they're not a cohabiting girlfriend or a wife. That falls under the category of a Class A misdemeanor. But the second you do it to a wife or a
what's really weird to me,
now it's a felony.
Is that
you're a prohibited person
in some areas you could get
domestic violence, and it makes it a felony.
Persecuted as spousal abuse for raising your voice or punching a wall. I've never heard of that. That's news to me. Like, everybody has discourse in relationship. People in relationships argue and they fight, but I think the important thing is that you're not laying your hands and you're not being physically violent or mentally abusive. I think that's the important thing in a relationship, is that you work the problems out. And I think, maybe if you do have a history of spousal abuse, of actually putting your hands on somebody, maybe you don't need to own a gun. That would fall under the list of people that probably shouldn't own a gun, or people with violent histories.
Or, hitting a wall or something like that. And she had her permit to purchase. She'd been waiting on it. And while she was waiting on it, her ex came in and stabbed her to death. And had she had that pistol, the situation might have turned out differently.
Man.
Just a simple fact of the matter is that those
it probably would have.
Bills that are currently being proposed won't do anything to change our homicide rates. There's a lot you would have to trick yourself into believing before, you actually could believe that bill is honestly.
And then the question is, why is our homicide rate so high?
Or they would even be right. In fact, I think we do need to scale back.
I do think crime is also highly correlated with poverty.
Post-1986 prohibition.
And there were psychologists that were looking into that, actually.
And anytime you go to an FFL to purchase a firearm, you do have to receive a background check. If you're purchasing a firearm online, that firearm gets shipped to an FFL. You go in and...
I'm going to pause it there. I would say would you agree that that is a good thing, that you do have to go through a background check to make sure that you don't have a violent history, to make sure that you are mentally stable, to make sure that you don't have any mental illnesses that would put you or other people at risk? I think that's ultimately the question, is who's at risk in purchasing the firearm. Now, however, I will say this, that now, he does mention in the video, and I will leave the link below, watch it, that, there are gun shows you can go to, and he says that you still have to fill out the paperwork and have it analyzed and go through background checks and stuff. But I have seen gun shows where they don't do that, where you literally can just go in and purchase a weapon, no questions asked. And do you think that that's appropriate? I don't know. I don't think it is. I really don't. I mean, somebody who's flipped their lid and has the ability to do that, that's what I mean. It's like, not where, but I think there needs to be a line drawn between understanding who can responsibly own a weapon and who can't. And I think that that's something that, when I talk about gun restrictions, that's what I'm talking about, is doing the background checks and making sure that this person has a high likelihood, because ultimately you can't predict if somebody's going to flip their lid or not, but you want to make sure that they at least have a high likelihood of using the firearm responsibly.
You get a background check. If you're purchasing at a gun show, likewise. Now, there's one exemption to that, and this is the one gun controllers don't talk about. Like here in Texas, I have a CHL, a concealed handgun license. So whenever I go into an FFL, all I do is fill out the 4473 form, which everyone has to fill out when they purchase from an FFL regardless. And I can purchase the firearm without the NICS check, without having to spend $15 or more dollars
I've never
for the NICS check. Now, what the gun controllers are talking about are what they call private transfers, person-to-person transfers, such as Johnny, if they decide they're tired of...
This is a ridiculous notion, and I agree with him that this is ridiculous.
But Jimmy, their friend, decides he wants to buy that Glock from them. Okay. Johnny's
I don't have a problem with people borrowing weapons and firearms from each other. I don't have a problem with that.
First off, Johnny and Jimmy have to be the resident of the same state. Second, Johnny cannot have known of, or should have known of, that little Jimmy was a...
I don't think they should have to be the resident of the same state, though.
That he is also breaking the federal law.
That falls under responsibility.
Now, a lot of private transfers go on among people that know each other as well. Meaning, all right, I'll give you an example. I loan my guns to friends a lot. I loan my guns to a few relatives here and there.
I don't have a problem with that.
Now, the issue we'll have with this is that, okay, do we really need to go in and pay $15 every time one of us transfers a firearm to the other and then gets it back? I appreciate you doing the video. I appreciate you being honest.
No, I think that's ridiculous.
And trying to actually look at the other side of the issue and giving a good thought to the other side of the issue. I think you're looking for the facts and you're trying to make the most informed opinion you can on the issue. And for that, I appreciate. There are a lot of people on the anti side, I think, aren't really looking for that, good discussion. I think you're a little bit different in most respects. And anybody else who is a little bit more on the pro-gun control side, I'm always willing to have a civil discussion on the issue. And, again, part of me on civil, when I say civil, obviously honesty. Honesty is a big part of that discussion, because without honesty, you can't really have a civil debate. And I do believe that the First Amendment, our freedom of speech, is one of the cornerstones to our Bill of Rights. It's one of the things that helps keep society free. Just the same as the right to keep and bear arms, the right to due process.
And honestly, I don't think people on the left or the right dispute the freedom of
unreasonable
speech.
search and seizures.
I really don't.
The Bill of Rights,
I think that's something that both the left and the right are pretty proud of.
All right, James, I look forward to hearing what you have to say in the future. I know I've got a lot of pro-Second Amendment videos on this channel as is. I particularly wanted to tailor a response particular to what you're saying, to address specifically what you're saying, and to have a discussion with you on the issue. I'm open to doing that with just about anybody who is more pro-gun control than not. And again, on the responses, I mean, sometimes you have to send it to me yourself because I might not always catch them. I know it took me a while to catch this video. So y'all take her easy out there and have a great day.
And thank you for that. So now to recap. Ultimately, the thing about being an adult is this, is that we have to take responsibility for our actions. And that's just an unfortunate side effect of, well, that's just that comes with freedom. One of the founding fathers said, with great freedom comes great responsibility. And that's very true. So, in all honesty, it's like, okay, so if you give a gun, if you let somebody borrow a gun and they're on the do not own guns list, the question is should the person that lent that gun be held accountable? Or should we just solely look at the mental state of the person that obtained the gun in the first place? Well, like I said, as an adult, you have freedoms, and with those freedoms come responsibilities. And with responsibilities comes accountability. We have to hold ourselves accountable and be able to hold ourselves accountable for the actions that we make. Now, it is true that it does say in the Constitution that we do have the right to bear arms. And to take that away is an infringement upon what our founding fathers wanted for us. Now, could they foresee that we have the firepower that we have today? No, they weren't magic angel babies. They had no way of knowing what we were capable of creating further in the future. They had no way of knowing that. They probably had some idea that things would change and evolve, and I think that they tried to create the Constitution so that it could be malleable to change as society changes. But to take away the right entirely, I don't agree with. But I think responsibility is a key point. And it sounds to me like you're pretty keen on being responsible in gun rights. And I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with people going to the shooting range and using their black rifles. I don't know all the names of the black rifles. I can't give you an example. But the black rifles and using those in shooting ranges and competitions, that actually sounds like it could be a lot of fun. And yeah, if a perpetrator was trying to infiltrate your house, it would be a very effective deterrent. Very effective, I imagine. But what I really wanted to get down to was the responsibility level. And like I said, you never know when somebody's going to flip their lid. You can't control or predict that. I will leave with this thought of, I had a friend once that didn't believe in guns and he believed more in swords because he felt that a gun was too easy. He felt that in Mortal Kombat, that a display of skill, a display of either brute force or mental strength was more important than, because he was basically saying that anybody could pick up a gun and get lucky and shoot in a vital area. That was his standpoint. But this is one of the great things about living in a free society, is that if you're not okay with guns, you don't have to own one. And if you do love guns, you can have all the black rifles and shotguns and magnums and guns, the guns that I would call crazy guns. I would call them crazy guns. You can own them, and you have the right to do that. And I think that that's one of the great things about living in a country like this, is that you can have differing opinions on them and living in the way that you see fit, and not succumbing to how other people feel, that not being pushed to live how somebody else thinks that you should live your life. The issue that a lot of people have on the left is that you do see a lot of gun violence, and they think that the sole answer to it is just getting rid of guns entirely. And I don't think that that's the answer. But I do think that we should try and figure out why crime rates are there. And I've covered this in another video, understanding our own psyche as human beings. I think a lot of the times we ascribe ourselves to almost a celestial form, that we're like in the spitting image of what people perceive as God. And we really need to stop doing that and realize that we are fallible creatures, we are animals, and we are capable of doing things. And we need to understand our psychology. We need to understand how we think. We need to understand how it is that we process this information and what drives us to the point or killing people. So that being said, I would never want to come into your home and take away all of your guns. I would never want to do that. I don't see any problem with you owning guns. It seems like you do it responsibly. And that is the issue that I have in the gun in gun rights versus gun control, is the responsibility level. As long as the responsibility level is being met and innocent people are not being hurt, I really don't have a problem with it. I really don't. The issue that I have is more with people who go out on murdering sprees, or people who shoot innocent people, people who rob people. You know, you were talking about crime rates. I have an issue with crime. I don't have an issue with guns themselves. Well, on a personal level, I do. Like I said, I would never own one regardless of whatever situation I'm in. Maybe if we did get overran by Syrian refugees, I might consider it. But ultimately, I don't want to. But at the same rate, I don't want to take away your rights to own them. I don't want to do that. I don't have a problem with you owning all these, what I perceive as crazy guns, because you handle them responsibly. But the thing is you have to understand, like, I don't know what the punishment would be if you did let somebody borrow a gun that did go out and use it irresponsibly, because you are held accountable for your actions as an adult. It's the same with drinking. You can't say, oh, I'm sorry, I got in a car accident and killed somebody, I was drunk, and that's my right. I mean, you're still accountable to that. But I don't think you should be completely held accountable for another person's actions either. I think maybe it should be just like maybe a slap on the wrist, and maybe like a firm talking to of saying, be more careful on who you lend your gun to. But like I said, you seem like the kind of person that's very responsible with firearms, and in that respect, I really don't have an issue. You can own whatever crazy gun you want. I'm not so sure that anybody really needs to own a rocket launcher, though. And some people on the pro side, they kind of advocate for that. And I think it's at that point, it's like, why do you want a rocket launcher? To show? Hopefully, that's all you want it for. It definitely would be a deterrent against a perpetrator trying to infiltrate your home. But that's not something you would take to the shooting range, blow a hole in the side of the building, you hit the target and everything else around it. I'm just saying that from a responsibility standpoint, I don't have a problem with that. And there's a lot more that I could comment on it, but the video is getting rather long. So I'm going to wrap it up and say that I think it's good that we do have the right to have guns in this country, as long as there's those checks and balances in place to make sure that we are giving guns to people that have a higher probability of being responsible. Ultimately, you cannot predict probability. You never know when someone's going to flip their lid. Please don't ever flip your lid. And if you ever do flip your lid, I hope you have the common sense to get the guns away from yourself, because you realize that you are an endangerment to others and maybe possibly to yourself. As long as these responsibilities are being met, and that you understand that if you break away from these responsibilities, you are accountable for your actions. And in that sense, that is as far as I take gun control. And if we are satisfied on that sense, we reach an agreement. But I will never own a gun. I will never do that. And I'm glad that you agree that not owning a gun is for everyone, and that you wouldn't advocate for someone like me owning a gun, because I really don't want to. At the same rate, I don't want to take your guns away. And like I said, that's the wonderful thing about living in a free country, as you can have differing opinions and beliefs and still live simultaneously. So with that, don't forget to like, share, subscribe. And with that, I'm out.